and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:12 p.m. in, yes, a very cold, very snowy, very icy, very grim city of Budapest. It's actually quite hazardous to walk around because with all the ice, it's very slippery, and it's no fun, to be honest. But thank you everybody who has joined us for our Tuesday night live stream. Really appreciate you all being here. And uh, obviously, there's a number of things to talk about, and the obviously uh, the biggest thing is the developments in Iran. Now, I have to say right away that it's very difficult to know what is going on in Iran. I mean, there's the internet blackout, and I'm very skeptical of almost all of the information that is coming out. These wild numbers that are being thrown around. Sometimes 2,000 are being killed, 5,000, 10,000, over 20,000. No one knows where these numbers are coming from. It's like, think of a number, double it. And and by the same token, I'm also skeptical of those who claim that, oh, it's all fizzled out now. Oh, it's over. There's the last hours of the protests, and then soon everything will be back to normal. So I don't see any evidence for that. But similarly, I'm not at all sure that that these numbers are in any way real. Um, Now, what without question is real is the absolute hypocrisy, dishonesty, and recklessness on the part of Western leaders who are kind of whipping up this hysteria um, over Iran and clearly egging on the the protests with a view to getting the United States involved. And of course, this is a classic. We've seen, uh, we've seen this so many times elsewhere. When there's a prospect, a real prospect of the United States getting involved militarily or by whatever means, then suddenly we have the stories of the atrocities. In order to whip up the agitation for intervention, and thereby putting pressure on the political leaders of the United States to get involved. And this is clearly what's happening now. And Trump, of course, started this by that truth that he sent out last week, when he said, "Well, if anyone, these protesters are shot, well, we're going to be doing some shooting ourselves," and he's been clearly threatening to get the United States involved. So he suddenly emerged as this humanitarian interventionist. He's this sort of the reprise of the Bill Clinton of the 1990s, and then Obama when it was with Libya and with Syria. Suddenly, oh, we're so horrified by these atrocities, we have to get involved, though without ever explaining how bombing, sending in rockets, how that's in any way going to alleviate the human suffering. And of course, nobody really wants to see that. It's all completely fraudulent because everybody knows if you start bombing, you're going to start killing people. You're not going to be saving lives by definition. You bomb, you kill. How can you possibly save anyone's life? And of course, that never happens. But if you obviously recall the um, the 1990s, when that this was the first of the great humanitarian interventions. It started really right at the beginning of the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1992. That already there was the drumbeat for a NATO intervention. NATO needs to bomb because somehow bombing is going to save people's lives. I mean, so no one even asked the question: how can bombing save anyone's life? And of course it doesn't. And so Trump now enjoys this good standing with the media because he's talking along these lines, precisely the opposite um, of what he had been saying while he was campaigning. He was against all these foreign interventions. He was against these forever wars. It was all just the military-industrial complex or driving it. Got to attend to domestic needs, but apparently he's so really worked up about what's going on in Iran that he feels that he needs to bring American power to bear. So he today sent out this truth, and it's a little small because I have to get it from my phone. For some reason, I can't get Truth Social on my computer. So it's a little small, but I'll read this out. Iranian patriots, and then uppercase, keep protesting, take over your institutions, save the names of the killers and abusers. They will pay a big price. I have canceled all meetings with Iranian officials until the senseless killing of protesters stops. And then help is on its way, uppercase. MIGA, no, MIGA does not mean make Israel great again. No, it's a MIGA means make Iran great again. And then President Donald Trump. So he says, save the names of the killers and abusers. Though I don't know how you can save anyone their names, but okay, save the names of the killers and abusers. They will pay a big price. I don't know how he's going to pay a kind of a big price. I mean, unless you intend to occupy Iran and book people, start arresting them and putting them on trial. So again, it suddenly sounds like the humanitarian interventionist, where hey, we're going to have trials. I have canceled all meetings of the Iranian officials until the senseless killing of protesters stops. Help is on its way. MIGA. So when you look at that, there's obviously, when you say help is on its way, you're suggesting that there'll be an American intervention. Now, this obviously, when in the middle of riots and then the suppression of riots, to suggest that help is on its way is only going to exacerbate the tension, because you're obviously going to encourage the rioters to use even more violence, and in the hope that somehow that violence will in turn provoke greater violence from the state. Well, obviously, that's what the state is supposed to do. And then that can be used to justify the American intervention, American use of force. So that is, of course, extraordinarily reckless, because people are going to lose their lives doing that. And it's really very destructive. It's exactly the opposite. I always have to take a look at this, because whenever Marty introduces himself, he always provides an excellent meme to introduce himself. So I got to take a look at this. This is this buffoonish character by the name of Nigel Farage. And he's got behind him is this poster, "Long live the Shah." And he, he's been sounding off in recent days about the Iranian leaders need to go, and so on. Now, Farage, and I've said this before, and I will wager, and that that he is going nowhere. He's going nowhere, absolutely nowhere. The notion that he will become prime minister is ridiculous. He will not be prime minister. He will do quite poorly in the next election. He will not be in any position to form a government. He will not be in any government. He will not be, he will not be even be a minority within any government. He's not going anywhere. And the reason I know this is that the only way you can break through the British two-party system, which is very, very hard to do. It's very, very hard to break into that kind of winner takes all system. Because really, if you win it, that means in every constituency to get, let's say, get 100 MPs in Parliament, 100 MPs in Parliament, you will need to win 100 constituencies, in each of which you will need to get about 40% of the vote, which is awfully difficult for a third party. And so, therefore, the only shot that you have to break through is if you offer a genuine alternative, if you really are doing something no one else is doing, saying something that no one else is saying. If you're not, if you're just simply a warmed over creature from one of the established political parties, which is what Reform now is essentially now being run by former Tories who have just abandoned Kim Badenoch and have now decamped to Reform. If you do that, then you're not offering people any sort of alternative. So that was the key to Trump's success, which was that you have to say things that no one else is saying. You have to give people a reason to abandon their traditional allegiances and vote for something different. And that's why I've said this before. I've brought up the case of the Social Democratic Party in Great Britain from the early 1980s, because I lived through that. And then there was this new party that emerged. Roy Jenkins was its leader. There was David Owen, Shirley Williams, all three of whom, and then it was a Gerald Thomas, Gerald Roger. No, I can't. There's a fourth guy. And they had all served in the Labour cabinet, and their only real selling point was that they were moderates, and that they were somehow centrist. They weren't the Tories, they weren't Labour, and but for a while they led the polls, and everyone was expecting the Social Democrats to form the next government. Because in every poll the Social Democrats were first. First Social Democrats, second Tories, then Labour. A poor third, and it never happened. Where are the Social Democrats now? I mean, it just they never got the votes, and they fused with the Liberals. Bill Rogers, that's the one. Bill Rogers. It's very hard to remember names like Bill Rogers. It's so so ubiquitous. But thank you, Mikey Molo, Bill Rogers. He was always the poor relation of the Gang of Four, Bill Rogers. But he was a poor relation because you remembered the three. But he was the one who was always difficult to remember. He was kind of nondescript, and he had never held, I don't think, a senior position in any government. The other three had held senior positions in government. But anyway, they faded out precisely because they didn't offer an alternative, and this is exactly. Samba Petro says Bill Rogers was the remaining extreme moderate and member of the Gang of Four. Exactly, he was the extreme moderate. and yeah, and that was that. So, but that was it, and that's what's always forgotten. For quite a while, they led the polls. They were number one. Poll after poll after poll. This went on for months and months and months. They were number one, and then they went nowhere. So Farage is kind of like that. So he was supposed to be the an advocate for moderation. Oh, no, sorry, no, an advocate for foreign policy restraint. So he was not, he was against all these wars, these adventures, domestic affairs, the usual kind of the same sort of people that Donald Trump kind of um, advocated on behalf of. Yeah, we're against intervention. That's Farage took his lead there, and that propelled him to his successes in British politics. Now, admittedly, there were other issues such as immigration, but same with Trump. But nonetheless, Farage was associated with foreign policy restraint, and above all, with not doing anything to provoke Russia unnecessarily. That was his whole thing. Really stupid to go around poking the bear. Really, he was very critical of Ukraine, and so on. Now, of course, he's talking about Putin's a thug, if Russian aircraft intrude in NATO airspace, I'm gonna shoot them down. Nonsense. And now here he is taking part in these demonstrations. Oh, the Ayatollahs need to go. So, basically now he's entirely somebody says here Peter Kovich says he's a fanatical Zionist. Yeah, he is. But in doing but that's part of the mainstream. If you're going to do something, you want to get votes, you want to win an election, you want to break through, you have to break with the mainstream. You have to break with Kemi Badenoch. You have to break with Starmer. You have to do something different. And he's not doing that. So, why would people waste their vote on him? He's for the birds. Mark my words. Mark my words when when the next election comes around, Reform will do very poorly. And everyone said, well, we were expecting Reform to do well. That's very disappointing. No, it's going to do very poorly. Anyway, so that was Trump, who, as I say, behaving reckless. And now, I don't know exactly what Trump intends to do. I mean, there's all the speculation he's going to launch missiles. And he may do that, but I don't see that missiles are going to make any real difference, since he's now embraced the cause of regime change in Iran. So missiles are not going to bring about regime change. So, but he may have other things in mind. I think we were all led to believe that when Netanyahu paid a visit to him recently in Mar-a-Lago, that was all about this supposed attack on Iran's ballistic missiles. But probably it was something very different, and that was that, hey, we've got something cooking here. We're going to try this regime change operation and then try to exploit that. Now, we don't yet know what Trump may have up his sleeve, in much in the same way that we were misled into thinking that he was going to launch missile attacks on Venezuela. He didn't do that. He did this seizure and abduction routine with Maduro. So, I don't think they're going to do a seizure and abduction in Iran, but they may have other things in mind, and they may have plans to set up some kind of alternative government Maybe somebody that they can push Khamenei out of the way and then and install somebody else. I don't know, but there may be uh, uh, other things that are being done. So, uh, but I think he is going to try to um, make good. This is certainly a moment to go after Iran. I mean, let's keep in mind that Israel and the United States had attacked Iran, unprovoked attack, incidentally, completely unprovoked, came out of the blue in last June. Um, Even as Iran was under the impression that the United States was negotiating seriously. And then of course, the fall of Assad in Syria, the diminution of power of Hezbollah, and Russia, of course, is obviously very preoccupied with Ukraine. So if you're in Israel, you're obviously thinking in terms of, well, this is the right moment to strike against Iran, and I think that's could almost certainly what Netanyahu was telling Trump. This is the moment to strike. The Iranian government is weak. It's vulnerable. It's suffered setbacks, diplomatic setbacks. It's suffered uh, political setbacks, and then you got the economy and so on. So this is the moment to strike, and that's why I think that that they're going to go for something here. I don't know if it's going to be successful, but I think they're going to go for something. And Trump really, having promised the exact opposite, is going down this regime change path. So anyway, so this was his truth that he had sent out, and here is the House Foreign Affairs Committee majority. So this is the Republicans. To the Iranian people, Ayatollah Khamenei has butchered your people, made rial the weakest currency in the world, and squandered your country's resources. Okay, so they sent that out. And then we have European countries summon Iran ambassadors. So France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Netherlands, UK, Finland, Denmark have all announced this afternoon that they have summoned Iran's respective ambassadors in their countries to their foreign ministries to formally object to the killings. The German foreign ministry said the Iranian regime's brutal crackdown on its own population is shocking, while France's foreign minister called it state violence unquestioningly unleashed on peaceful protesters. I always love it when they say things like peaceful protesters. I mean, even when you're looking at the videos, and obviously all the videos you have to take with a pinch of salt, but at the very least, you can say, I don't know whether they're all peaceful. I've seen an awful lot of videos where they're looking anything but peaceful. And then Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said, we have summoned the Iranian ambassador in Spain to express our rejection of the violence against demonstrators and urge respect for the fundamental rights of Iranians. So here they are, they're all in this moralistic high dudgeon about Iran. And you think, well, what's Iran got to do with you? I mean, you got no problems of your own to be addressing, but this is what they love to do when they suddenly find some cause that they think is going to be an easy one, because well, nobody particularly likes the, uh, the clerics, and therefore they think, well, we're going to win some easy points. We'll show ourselves to be on the side of good. We'll show ourselves to be very moral, because after all, they had spent Was it that's or 2020? They'd spent 2 years completely indifferent to what was going on in Gaza. I mean, that they paid no attention to it all. They never got indignant in this way about Gaza. At most, they would send out a tweet. Well, we kind of urge restraint on all sides, and then they would, of course. But it's all Hamas's fault. It's Hamas who brought this on. You know, this is all the fault of Hamas. So that's the maximum you would expect from them throughout the 2 years of Gaza, and now suddenly they think, oh, we got to show ourselves that we're really good. We're good people. We're good people. We're our values. So this is we can now talk about our values. And so that's sending out these statements. Of course, by doing so, they're applying some pressure on Trump that he will do something. Maybe put the forces of NATO at the disposal of the protesters. Not because it's going to do anything. Not because that obviously is going to lead to a complete destruction, violence, death, more killings. But hey, we can show that we're on the side of good. NATO's on the side of good. NATO's about values, as Stoltenberg, the late unlamented Stoltenberg, used to say. Anyway, that was the statement of the Europeans, and then we have they're summoning the ambassadors, and then we have UK announces new Iran sanctions. Well, this is always the moment we have the Iran sanctions. And summons ambassador. Further sanctions against Iran will target finance, energy, transport, software, and other significant industries. So that's really going to be useful. So when you sanction, you're going to hurt ordinary Iranians. Isn't the fate of the ordinary Iranians, isn't that what you're supposed to be concerned over? Isn't it because these poor innocent Iranians who are being set upon by these horrible ayatollahs? So now you're going to impose sanctions against them. That's really going to help them, just like the bombs are really going to help them. The UK's foreign secretary said she previously told, this is Yvette Bulls, an absolute, total, utter dimwit. The UK's foreign secretary said she previously told leaders in Tehran that it would take time to fully implement the UK sanctions. And during that window, they should start compliance and engagement with the international community and end the deception and obfuscation. Why should they? I mean, this is what she means, of course, by the international community. She means, of course, the United States and the UK. But the United States and the UK, I mean, especially the United States, they were involved in the unprovoked attack of last June. It was totally unprovoked. And the British then took part in reimposing the sanctions against Iran, even though Iran hadn't done anything wrong, but they reimposed the sanctions under the snapback mechanism of the JCPOA. So that was towards the end of last year. So now Iran is supposed to re-engage with people who bombed them and who sanctioned them. We've got to re-engage. Engage in the dialogue with people who keep whacking you over the head. And so here then is Yvette Bulls, and then she added, weapons inspectors still have not been given access. What weapons inspectors? What is she talking about? What weapons inspectors is she talking about? I told you she's an absolute nitwit. I think she means the IAEA, who are just simply there to monitor. Well, at this stage, since the nuclear facilities have been destroyed, There's nothing really for them to monitor, but all they were doing were monitoring the enrichment. But there's no weapons inspectors. I mean, it's like she put it as if somehow there's a nuclear weapons inspectors. And far from changing their approach, we have seen instead a reversion to the most brutal forms of repression on their own street. Can you imagine anyone talking in this idiotic, sanctimonious, stupid way? The most brutal forms of repression. Now, the British government. I mean, not only does it throw people in prison for protesting over Gaza, shoving elderly women down, onto the pavement, um, and not only does it throw people in prison for their Facebook postings, but remember, just a few years ago with COVID and how they handled the COVID demonstrators. Um, so, can you imagine how the British authorities would handle demonstrators who try to burn government buildings, who would use violence against the British police? Now, it's true that at the time of the sort of the George Floyd riots, the British, unable to think of anything originally themselves, just simply always take over whatever the Americans are doing. So they took over the whole George Floyd case because, well, because they've got no ideas of their own. So they said, oh, well, we'll go, Minnesota because of what's going on in Minnesota. Um, and then they went in through the whole taking the knee and all this nonsense that the British went in for, and the British footballers, the footballers were, before every single match they would take the knee. This went on for several years, and they just simply wouldn't stop taking the knee. They just, it just became a way of life. That before every match, long after the whole George Floyd thing was over, long after um, uh, Derek Chauvin had been tried, convicted, imprisoned, long after that, they still continued to take the knee because of what happened in Minnesota. Um, but anyway, and they're doing it now. I mean, the British are again very indignant about ICE and Minneapolis. But it is true that because they suddenly embraced the whole Black Lives Matter cause, they didn't do very much to deal with the violence caused by Black Lives Matter. And so you had statues getting just taken down, and they just simply didn't raise any objections to that. But that depends on whose ox is being gored. Had it been the right, the whatever the sort of the skinhead right, or that which manifested itself after the killing in Southport, was in 2024, when those three little girls were killed, and then there were these riots. Boy, did the state come down against them. That was, that's that just gives you the two-tier justice. Boom, they really were thrown into prison. So it all really depends on who's burning the buildings. But anyway, go back to this. It's very hard, really. People like Yvette Cooper or Yvette Bowles. I mean, it's very hard to tolerate her. As a result, I can confirm the UK will bring forward legislation to implement full and further sanctions and sectoral measures. The UK has already designated key players in Iran's oil, energy, nuclear, and financial systems. Oh, so fantastic. You're going to go after it. Now, what are these people in the Iran's oil, energy, nuclear and financial systems. Why are they getting punished? I mean, what have they done? I mean, but that's the thing about the sanctions. What have they done in order to? I mean, they're in the oil industry. I mean, what are they going around hitting any people? She told Parliament she had also summoned the Iranian ambassador after speaking to Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi yesterday. And of course, when she speaks in Parliament, you have all these loud here. You know, nobody says what kind of nonsense are you doing? I mean, do you really think anyone in the world admires Britain? Anyone in the world thinks that this is fantastic? You know, that the British are really making a moral stand. Do you think anyone in the world takes seriously the idea that the British are somehow a very moral people? Here we are, and then we're back with the Yvette Cooper because she just couldn't stop talking. And so the UK's Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper has condemned the Iranian leadership for the horrendous and brutal killing of protesters and said the government had summoned the Iranian ambassador to underline the gravity of the situation. What gravity? What gravity of the situation? What has it got to do with Britain? The gravity of the situation. She called Iran's crackdown on anti government protesters the most brutal and bloody repression against public protests in Iran for at least 13 years. So say, none of this sanctimoniousness, none of this hysteria, or this, tearing your hair out. We saw none of that for 2 years as Israel went on a rampage in Gaza. Addressing MPs in the House of Commons in London, Cooper said, I am fearful that the reports that we have seen may underestimate the full scale of the horror, the scale of the horror. Just pile on the horror. As further evidence and testimony reaches the outside world, videos are still emerging, including of what appear to be protester corpses lined up in body bags outside a hospital in the outskirts of Tehran. The Iranian regime has called for a 3-day period of national mourning, but only for its security forces. No acknowledgement of dead protesters. Well, why should they? Yeah, I mean, they just take these protesters as violent insurrectionists. Why should they engage in any mourning for that? That's exactly what any government anywhere would do. Instead, the regime peddles its manufactured narrative of foreign manipulation. Oh, manufactured narrative. This is the British, the manufactured narrative. It's like when they said the manufactured narrative of the Russians claiming that anyone tried to assassinate Putin. Then the Russians present the evidence, and then because they just ignore that. So that manufactured evidence, manufactured narrative. Mossad is making no secret of its involvement. Israel is making no secret of its involvement. Mike Pompeo openly said, Mossad is there. Mossad is involved. Now, of course, when they do this, it's all done with a view to trying to instigate and provoke the Iranian authorities. And why do they want to do that? Well, of course, because they want to get Trump to get involved. They want just like they want Trump in Ukraine and they want Trump in Iran. And of course, that the two are connected because they think that the more Trump gets into the whole thing of foreign interventionism, the more he's going to abandon all the restraints and all the hesitations and all the caveats and the caution that had previously characterized him during his first term, when he was quite reluctant to get involved in these things. Bolton kept pushing him, but he was a little reluctant to do it. And of course, all the years when he campaigned against foreign interventionism, he spent the years in exile attacking the neocons. The neocons always want to get involved in other countries' internal affairs. Oh, not going to do it under Trump. So I think the Europeans are thinking that if they can get Trump involved in Iran, that means all of his previous restraints about foreign interventionism will disappear. So it's a shrewd calculation. Anyway, here then, this is hard work, going through Yvette Ball's. Instead, the regime peddles its manufactured narrative of foreign manipulation and seeks to portray peaceful protesters. Of course, they're always peaceful protesters as criminals and terrorists. So apparently, she's been looking at all these videos, but she didn't see the videos of people getting their heads kicked in by these protesters. She didn't see people throwing Molotov cocktails. I mean, amazing. You looked at all these videos, but you didn't see those. All the while pursuing a brutal and relentless crackdown on its own people. All right. Anyway, then, so that's Yvette. And then Ursula von der Leyen. Never one to pass up any opportunity to grandstand. And so she says, the rising number of casualties in Iran is horrifying. I unequivocally condemn the excessive use of force and continued restriction of freedom. The European Union has already listed the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in its entirety under its human rights sanctions regime. It's in close cooperation with Kaya Kallas. Further sanctions on those responsible for the repression will be swiftly proposed. Very swift. We stand with the people of Iran who are bravely marching for their liberty. And you know all about the people of Iran. That's just somehow them. They're all 90 million of them. They're all marching for liberty, and you stand with all of them. Now, as somebody said, there is a difference between Kaya Kallas and the president. No, I mean, sorry. There's a difference between Ursula von der Leyen and the president of Iran, and that difference is that the president of Iran actually was elected. There was a competitive election, and he was elected. Ursula von der Leyen, who purports to be the president of the EU, sometimes she's just the president of Europe, was never elected to anything. So she goes around making all these pronouncements, talking about sanction, we're going to sanction this, we're going to sanction that, I'm going to work on that. And then she's never actually run for an election. No one actually voted for her to be the president of Europe. She was just a failed, abysmal politician hoisted into office by her patron, Angela Merkel. Anyway, so that's her. And of course, then, is this when is, yes, and Bundeskanzler Friedrich Merz. This guy is just such an absolute dolt. We are deeply concerned about reports of violence by Iranian security forces and strongly condemn the killing of protesters. Macron, Starmer, and I urge the Iranian authorities to refrain from violence and to uphold the fundamental rights of Iran's citizens. And then he goes again. He's just, he's got nothing on his plate other than to send out these tweets. We call on the Iranian leadership to protect its population rather than threaten it. The regime's violence against its own people is not a sign of strength, but of weakness. It must end immediately. To underscore this message, we are working on further EU sanctions. Of course, you are. I mean, who would have expected anything else? And then Kaya Kallas, it's always a little difficult for her because she spends all her time fulminating against Russia. So she suddenly has to, switch her mind. I mean, she's not exactly a deep thinker, or, not it doesn't have a capacious brain. So it's quite difficult for her just suddenly to switch over and talk about Iran and not talk about Russia. So the Iranian people are fighting for their future. By ignoring their rightful demands, the regime shows its true colors. Images from Tehran reveal a disproportionate and heavy handed response by the security forces. Any violence against peaceful demonstrators is unacceptable. Shutting down the internet while violently suppressing protests exposes a regime afraid of its own people. Of course, yeah. And then Macron, I condemn the state violence that indiscriminately targets Iranian women and men who courageously demand respect for their rights. It's amazing how they all kind of coordinate the same message. Respect for fundamental freedoms is a universal requirement, and we stand alongside those who defend them, except, of course, when it comes to fundamental freedoms and human rights in your own countries, where you ban media and and shove people in prison. But let's talk about Iran or let's talk about Russia. Let's not talk about the suppression of freedom here in Europe. And of course, Zelensky, what a surprise. He kind of decided to weigh in as well. And he says, what is currently happening in Iran, including the widespread protests, is in fact a revolution. And it is also a clear sign that it will not be easier for Russia. So, this is the link between Iran and Russia. Somehow, if you get Trump here, then you can get Trump involved in Ukraine. It will not be easier for Russia, and every ordinary person on earth really wants the people of Iran to finally be fortunate enough to free themselves from the regime that exists there and has brought about a great deal of evil, including for Ukraine and other countries. It is important that the world does not miss the moment when change is possible, and every leader, every country, international organization must now get involved and help the people eliminate those who are responsible, which unfortunately Iran has been in this way. Everything could be different. So you can see here how they're all basically lining up just as they lined up on Ukraine. And incidentally, one should say that message from Zelensky was written in Persian. So it was Persian, but that was a machine translation of his statement. So, and then here we have, I want to show, maybe this is it. Arakchi, yeah. So he's the Iranian foreign minister, and he sent out a rather clever tweet addressing, of course, the Germans, particularly the Germans. And he says, of all governments, the one in Germany is perhaps the worst place to address human rights. Yes. The reason is simple. Its blatant double standards over the past years have obliterated any shred of credibility. When Iran defeats terrorists who kill civilians and police officers, the German chancellor rushes to declare that violence is an expression of weakness. What then does Mr. Merz have to say about his wholehearted support for the mass murder of 70,000 Palestinians in Gaza? Well, what indeed? And that goes for all of these comments who get so indignant about Iran, and while they're saying nothing about Israel. And of course, what makes this particularly um, obnoxious is that it is the Western powers, Britain, Germany, and of course the United States, that arm Israel. So therefore, they don't have anything to do with Iran. They don't arm Iran. So they're getting indignant about Iran, which actually doesn't, whatever it's doing against the rioters, it's doing using its own weapons. It's not using Western tools, unlike Israel. So his point here is that, well, you had nothing to say about Israel and the 70,000 that he killed in Gaza, and it killed them using the arms that you provided. Germany in particular. Germany provided arms to Israel. Germany enabled Israel to do this. So you have all the more reason to condemn Israel, which is, after all, something that you do have a say over, you do have some influence over. And after all, Germany acknowledged that it had some influence over Israel when, at some point, it said, "Well, we're going to put a hold on this particular weapon system." And of course, they put a hold on for a couple of weeks, and then of course they went back to delivering these weapon systems. But they don't. Germany doesn't provide Iran with anything, but it does provide Israel. So they're very indignant about Iran, over which Germany doesn't have any sway, but has nothing to say about Israel. And in fact, on the contrary, Germany and Merz in particular approved of what Israel did when Israel launched that unprovoked attack last June on Iran. And there was Merz who said, "Well, Israel is doing our dirty work for us." It's like, when always says these things, you made a big mistake. We made a big mistake in signing off on German reunification. Well, I was, it wasn't up to me. I didn't make that decision. But Gorbachev, who did, he has a lot to answer for. And anyway, so Arakchi goes on. He says here, Iranians also recall Mr. Merz's repugnant hailing of Israel when it bombed homes and businesses in our country last summer. Yes, that unprovoked and unlawful violence, the German chancellor insisted, was Israel doing Europe a favor by carrying out its dirty work. This is to say nothing about how Germany has been mute about the recent US kidnapping of a head of state. My German counterpart's lecture about human rights and legitimacy is equally meaningless, as his employer has done nothing to uphold either. Yes, that's the Johannes Wadefuhl. Wadefuhl, kind of somewhat appropriate name. Do us all a favor. Have some shame. Nope, that ain't gonna happen. Better yet, Germany should end its unlawful interference in our region, including its support for genocide and terrorism. Anyway, so Politico has this: European leaders vow to hit Iran with sanctions. Of course they are. After regime kills protesters. Political leaders stepped up demands for new EU sanctions against the regime in Iran. And then we have Roberta Metsola. She's the lesser known of that threesome of Ursula von der Leyen, Kaja Kallas, and Metsola. She's the Speaker of the European Parliament. And Europe needs to act, and fast. Fast. Now, I love this kind of fast. What do you think is going to happen, when you impose these sanctions? I mean, you say fast, as if somehow it's going to make any difference whatsoever when you impose sanctions. Keep in mind, sanctions are already in place. The EU has already sanctioned Iran, And then you have the UN sanctions, the snapback of the UN sanctions last year. So, what additional sanctions are going to make any real difference? Um, and then here we have this. Metzola, and then Metzola, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and Irish Prime Minister Michael Martin are among those who want Brussels to escalate sanctions against Tehran. The EU's executive in Brussels is reviewing options and promised to come forward with a plan. Proposals under discussion include designating the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization and tougher measures against regime figures responsible for the violence. And then Metzola says political signals, support, and solidarity are important, but we need to show that we are serious. Why? I mean, you're not serious about anything that goes on in the EU. You do nothing to protect your own farmers, your own workers. You do nothing to protect the economies of the EU, but this we have to show we are serious. The EU must demonstrate is watching the unfolding crisis, listening to the calls of those demonstrating against the regime, and most importantly, acting. If we do not stand up and call out these injustices, we let all these brave people in Iran who are marching for justice down. We cannot let this happen. Imagine all this hot air, this totally stupid, pointless hot air that she comes up with. I mean, it's like, we had that Yvette Cooper woman, with all this completely meaningless drivel. And you don't care about the Iranians. Just like you don't care about the Ukrainians. So all that you're doing, that is simply, peddling this whole thing of just sort of kind of whipping up the kind of a fervor and trying to somehow generate an easy. They think it's going to be an easy win, or at least, even if it's not a win, they don't really care because they never get a win. I mean, like Libya, there was the drumbeat for intervention in Libya in 2011. They didn't really care that it didn't actually serve Libya in any way at all, but they like the feeling of attacking and bombing. We're gonna do some bombing. We're gonna do some bombing. These Roberta Metsola, all these creatures. Never serve a day in the military in their lives. Never heard a shot fired in anger. Never had a moment of hardship in their life. Not one moment. They've always had money. They've always dressed nicely. They've always gone to excellent restaurants. And here they are advocating, essentially to use violence against Iran. And here we go and continue. That it's so hard to take these people. And then Metsola has announced she's banning all Iranian diplomats and officials from entering any of the European Parliament's buildings or offices. Wow, that's terrible. I mean, if I were banned from the European Parliament's buildings and offices, I just want to I don't know. I would want to just drown myself. I don't know. I say I can't go on living. If I can't have access to European Parliament's buildings or offices, then life has no meaning. She then set out her criteria for new sanctions. Measures must be effective and targeting, ensuring that those responsible politically, and military, and judicially are held accountable. So this is the crap they always say about sanctions. Sanctions are always targeted. No, they're not. No, they're not. Sanctions are never targeted. Sanctions always hurt ordinary people. They always hurt ordinary people. I mean, it's nonsense. They always say these things. Oh, it's going to be really targeted. We're just targeting the leaders. Whereas everyone always knows that when you impose sanctions, The leaders, the people who matter, the powerful people, people who have money, power, prestige, they always will get around the sanctions. They will always find ways to get around sanctions. They have the means to do so. The only people who suffer as a result of sanctions are ordinary people. It's always been the case, and despite all these lies put about by these Western leaders, these are targeted sanctions. Anyway, Callas. EU's Callas threatens tougher sanctions on Iran over brutal crackdown. Look, because Politico puts a brutal crackdown in its headline. And here's the EU's top diplomats, Kaya Kallas, is gearing up to pitch fresh sanctions against Iran following a government crackdown that has reportedly killed hundreds of people since protests broke out nearly 2 weeks ago. And then what does she tell Politico? Says, the EU already has sweeping sanctions in place on Iran. Of course it has. On those responsible for human rights abuses, nuclear proliferation activities, and Tehran's support for Russia's war in Ukraine. So that's another one that you have to go out. Sanction Iran for support for Russia's war in Ukraine, and I'm prepared to propose additional sanctions in response to the regime's brutal repression. So I'm prepared to do it. Well, thank you, Kaya. The regime has a track record of crushing protests, and we see a heavy-handed response by the security forces. Citizens are fighting for a future of their own choosing and risking everything to be heard. So it's like the sanctions against Russia. You already had 19 dollops of sanctions, so well, let's do the 20. So it says, well, we already have lots and lots of sanctions on Iran in place, so let's do some more because we just like doing that. Anyway, so before we get on to Greenland, which I think is a little more entertaining than Iran. Let's take a look at our locals page and the comments and questions of Gagglers, because the people who ensure that the dogs are kept happy, kept warm, and kept in clover at least through these brutal winter months. So just they say, oh well, I feel bad for these poor dogs. They work all the time. They're unrewarded. So maybe we can do something for the dogs. So I really appreciate the kindness of Gagglers. And so first of all, here's Danaki. Danaki is really great. I mean, he posts so much fascinating information on our locals board. So very much a strong incentive for everybody. The people who lurk on YouTube or Rumble. Please join our locals community. You get lots and lots of stuff, and ideally, you could contribute something. As a subscription, but you can actually get a free subscription, and you still get lots and lots of stuff. So, and among the stuff that you would get, the great postings of Danaki. Anyway, Danaki says, "Rejoice, comrades! The 3-day SMO has now outlasted the so-called Great Patriotic War, with Kramatorsk and Slavyansk nowhere in sight. Just two more weeks to flatten the curve, and you will all marvel at the brilliance of the Gerasimov doctrine, as per Pepe, full of shit kabars, fan fiction, Xenon porn." So yes, we've now reached that moment, the number of days of the Great Patriotic War, and so now it's the same number of days. Now I don't know whether people have had a chance to watch the interview I had earlier today with Paul Craig Roberts, and of course we discussed this very point at great length. And it's in a way it's even worse than the way Danaki has characterized it, because Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, that's still a long way off. And these are heavily fortified cities. I mean, this is why are they heavily fortified? Because NATO has had 8 years to heavily fortify them, 8 years before the start of the so-called SMO. And then, of course, since the start of the SMO, they've continued to fortify them. So taking Slavyansk and Kramatorsk will take some doing. That's going to be a lot of fighting. A lot of heavy casualties will be involved. Now, when I say it's even worse than that, because even if that were to happen, even if Russia were finally to take Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, and God knows what casualties, if Russia were then to take Kherson and Zaporozhye, they've now taken all this territory of Ukraine. Russia still hasn't accomplished what it sought to accomplish in 2022, which is security. Russia has a real problem with NATO on its frontiers. So the most that you might get is you've got a little bit more of a buffer space um, against a possible NATO attack. So you've now acquired this kind of this room, and as a cushion against a NATO attack. Well, that's a lot of casualties that you've suffered to get there. Because remember, that's what Stalin did in 1939, 1940, when he attacked the Baltic states and Finland, because that's what he wanted. He needed the buffer states. He needed to give himself some space as a cushion for the eventual German attack. It was a very shrewd strategic move on the part of Stalin. And but that's it. It succeeded. They took the Baltic states. They defeated Finland. They got Finland was forced to cede territory, but it was over and done with by 1940. It didn't drag on for years and years. So the problem here is that even if you take all this territory, NATO continues with the war. Why would NATO stop? NATO will continue with the war. And therefore, you would not have bought any security, because not only will NATO continue with the war, NATO will undertake rearmament. It's already beginning to do that, a rearmament, because NATO envisages a war with Russia, probably around 2030. So that's in about 4 years' time. By then, NATO figures Russia will be sufficiently weakened that NATO will be able to take out Russia. The problem for Russia right now is not only has it suffered a great deal for what what it has achieved in Ukraine, but it's nowhere near acquiring it's any of the goals of this operation, and it's hard to see how it can acquire those goals. What I think Russia probably wanted, it's hard to know exactly what they wanted, but they probably thought that with Trump entering the White House, with Trump somehow was skepticism about Ukraine, Trump's contempt for Zelensky, that Trump would just want to wrap this up, and then he's going to apply pressure on Zelensky. He's going to apply pressure on the Europeans to, come to some accommodation with Russia. But it's now clear Trump is not going to do that. I mean, it was always a long shot that he would go down that path, but now, as far as the Russians are concerned, they claim that, first of all, we had the attack on Russia's strategic bomber fleet. That was last year. Then we had the attack on Putin's compound, an assassination attempt on Putin, and then we had the seizure of a Russian flagged ship. Now, this has all happened under Trump's watch. This was not the Biden. This was under Trump's watch. Trump, that they speak so highly of. They will speak very warmly about him. Now, you have two options. Either Trump signed off on these highly risky adventures, um, in which case Trump obviously has utter contempt for Russia. He has no respect at all for Russia. He thinks they can do these kinds of things to Russia without any consequences. Or he didn't sign off on it, and it was done by the CIA, the deep state, or whoever runs these kinds of operations, and Trump knew nothing about it. In which case, Trump isn't really in control of his own government. And so, again, then why would Russia be wasting their time on Trump? So that neither explanation is is particularly heartening. So then we'd say, well, where do we go from here? And I guess the war goes on. Um, Russia can still hope that Ukraine will collapse. I mean, maybe it will, but hasn't happened yet. But I think the more serious problem for Russia is that with Trump there, Trump is now on a high. He feels that he can do what he wants. He can actually take huge risks, as he did with Venezuela, and come out on top. And he's not afraid of Russia. He says, we've done all these things to Russia, all the things that we've been so afraid of doing, and Russia hasn't in any way responded in kind. So, given that, it's likely that Trump is going to do more and more of these kinds of things, more and more assassination attempts, terrorist attacks, all kinds of very, very dangerous, very high risk um, tactics that could certainly end very badly. But where it doesn't go is to any kind of a conclusion to this war. And I just don't see how this how this goes, how this can be brought to an end. And anyway, and then Danaki says, and in other news, has Trump disbanded NATO yet? Yeah, any minute now. You're right. Any minute now, he's going to walk out of NATO. Yes. So anyway, thank you, Danaki. And here's Cynthia. Now, as I always say, Cynthia is a resident film scholar and film expert. She's the person who teaches us about films, who kind of provides us with background information about films, who actually gives Gagglers a sense of the complexity of film production and filmmaking in general. And so we always learn from Cynthia when we have our screenings, and we watch very good films, and then Cynthia provides us with amazingly detailed and fascinating background briefings on the film. So we're right now in the middle of screening Eisenstein's Ivan the Terrible. So we had part one yesterday. It's still up on our locals board. So that's why I'm urging people join our locals community. You can watch Eisenstein's Ivan the Terrible and enjoy as you do so Cynthia's really, really fascinating commentary. It's very, very, very detailed, very complex, very learned, and just about anybody reading it will come out of it, much smarter than he was before. So thank you so much, Cynthia. Anyways, Cynthia says, after learning that Eisenstein was gay, added a fascinating layer to how I see Ivan the Terrible, especially use of gender reversal to code the villains. Drawing on the Peking opera mask tradition, he abandoned realism for stylized caricature. Yeah, Ivan's aunt, Efrosinia, is given a sharp predatory masculinity. Very much so. I mean, in fact, when you looked at her, um, your immediate assumption was indeed that that's a man. Yes, and deliberately you think it's a man, and then you have to, it takes a little bit of uh, careful observation to realize that no, that's not a man. That's a woman. You're absolutely right. So she had a predatory masculinity to signal ruthless ambition, while her son Vladimir is feminized. Yep, absolutely. He looked had that very girlish, and really almost like the sort of classic kind of gay twink boy. I mean, this was made in the 1940s, but then you think, yeah, that's he had very much had that gay twink look to him. It's feminized and infantilized to embody aristocratic weakness, turning politics into grotesque symbolic theater. Any thoughts on this? I think you're absolutely right. I think that there's a lot of that, and it is quite striking because this was made in the 1940s, and he was made in the Soviet Union, which had fairly conservative views at that time on homosexuality. So the Soviet Union went through a number of uh, iterations on these kind of sexual and moral issues. So in the early days of the Bolshevik Revolution, they were very kind of liberal, on the sexual moral questions. They pretty much abolished. In fact, they did abolish marriage. So in fact, the status of a common law marriage was exactly the same as a regular marriage. And of course, one of their first acts was to decriminalize homosexuality, and of course, they decriminalized abortion, and so that was all in the kind of early days of the Bolsheviks. Then, of course, they became more conservative. Um, one reason, which obviously was they needed population. I mean, they need it's a big country. You need a lot of people to populate that big country, and so in order to encourage procreation, they started cracking down on abortion and cracking down on homosexuality. Now, Eisenstein was never, for obvious reasons, Eisenstein was not openly gay. I mean, he seems to have had a quite overt kind of homosexual life in Mexico, even though it's not that even that isn't entirely clear. Though I mean, there are all the sketches that he made during the time in Mexico, which clearly suggest homosexual inclinations. Whether he acted on them, I mean, that is far from clear. But it would certainly have been difficult for him. I mean, when he returned to the Soviet Union, if um, he was, so if he was believed to be homosexual. So, however, as you said, there's a lot of that kind of clearly homoerotic components in the film. I mean, particularly when they were torturing these the in the Kazanis, the Khanates, and there was all these young men, very young men, also boys who were kind of half naked and tied up and tortured. Um, the the homosexuality aspect was fairly obvious, um, and so that it, but the within Soviet art, there was always an interesting kind of homoerotic component. I mean, if you looked at that, well, the constructivism, and of course in the Stalinist art, which kind of really extolled masculinity. You know, the men were all very handsome, all packed with muscle. So it was so that was very much a feature of Soviet art. But you know, um, then it kind of changed, you know, afterwards. But so you know, I mean, there was a famous encounter between Nikita Khrushchev and the Soviet sculptor Neizvestny, and Khrushchev sort of looked at this work and you know, and said, you know, what is this? Are you a pederast or something? Now, a pederast in Russian is just generally, you know, homosexual. I mean, pederast in English means just someone who has a liking for young boys, but pederast in Russian means just any homosexual. But when he said that, when Khrushchev said that to Neizvestny, that was just terrifying, because that was outlawed. I mean, it was, you know, just completely outlawed. I mean, so you know, you get called by the Soviet leader a pederast, you're in real trouble. So you know, it was kind of an interesting. I say it was there was a kind of the homoerotic component in Soviet art, even though um, the Soviet Union actually, you know, had quite strict uh, you know, laws and general social acceptance. It really wasn't accepted. I mean, it actually adopted quite conservative moral views on these questions. So they went right back, you know, completely changed their view from the early Bolshevik days on that issue. Um, but with you know, without question, it is really interesting that you're right that there is that homoerotic component, which Stalin obviously quite liked. I mean, he didn't have any issue with that, and never thought, as Khrushchev might have thought, hey, what's the matter with you? You know, are you a pederast or something? So anyway, then Cynthia goes on. But what really jumps out at me is how deliberately Eisenstein made Ivan look like Lenin. Um, yeah, okay, I can see that. That never really um, struck me particularly. One reason why it didn't really strike me particularly is that I don't think Eisenstein would have wanted, you know, if you want to enjoy Stalin's favor, you don't want to make the hero of your film look like Lenin. I mean, remember, by this time, Stalin had become really the embodiment of the Soviet state. Lenin was much diminished. I mean, it was Stalin. Stalin was front and center. You know, in all the pictures of Lenin and Stalin and Marx and Engels, it was Stalin who was the most prominent. You know, then Lenin, then Marx, and then Engels. But it was Stalin was at the center of public attention. So if you're going to make him look like Lenin, then that wouldn't particularly please Stalin. Um, yeah, I guess it never occurred to me that he was trying to make him look like Lenin. It didn't. I don't. I mean, you know, yes. First of all, Lenin was almost completely bald, whereas he had sort of his, you know, he was losing his hair, but he wasn't really completely bald. But he did have that kind of Lenin-like beard. Um, That's, I don't know. That's interesting. It simply didn't occur to me. Yeah. Anyway, then it says the irony is hard to miss. Stalin's mortal enemy Trotsky had an even sharper one. Yes, but Trotsky always at least had he was identified. Yes, he had the beard, but he also had the frizzy hair, and then he always had glasses. So if you look at, well, what's the Trotsky look? I mean, Trotsky would always wear those little glasses, which in Lenin didn't. So that's why you would never really think of him looking like Trotsky because you would always associate him with the glasses. Since Stalin bankrolled the film, you'd expect Ivan to resemble him. That's exactly right. I mean, Stalin would not have the hero of the film look like Lenin. If you're gonna have if you're gonna have him look like a Soviet leader, he's gonna look like Stalin, a mirror of his rule. Instead, Eisenstein framed Evin as a Lenin-like figure, even visually echoing Trotsky, quietly sidestepping Stalin. It feels less like an accident and more like a subtle provocation. Any thoughts on that? That's why I don't. I agree it would be a provocation, and I don't think he would do it. I think that by 1944, this is really at the height of Stalin's reputation, because he was now leading the country to a fantastic victory, and it presided over everything, the collectivization, the industrialization, everything else. So he was, you're not going to put Lenin there. As far as Stalin was concerned, Lenin was really a pretty much a diminished figure after the immediate revolution. I mean, you got 1917, 1918, and then of course he has, there's an assassination attempt. He never really recovers from the assassination attempt, and then of course he has a stroke. So really, in terms of the Soviet state, it's kind of not really dominated by Lenin. I mean, Lenin obviously is the founder of the Communist Party, but Stalin is the figure of the Soviet state. So everything else, for the most of the last few years of the Soviet state, Lenin dies in January 1924. And so the last few years, he was pretty much banned from making any decisions. I mean, it was the Politburo that was really running the country, and Lenin, of course, didn't like it, but that was part of Stalin's strategy of keeping Lenin away from any decision making. So that's really from the early 20s. So that was 20 years earlier. So that's why I think Stalin would feel, hey, I mean, if we're going to talk about Soviet power, if we're talking about building up a state, creating a powerful Russia or a powerful Soviet Union, then that's me. That's not Lenin. Lenin's the guy from 1917. That was his moment. But everything that happened after 1917, that's me. That's Stalin. So that's why I don't think that's what was meant by that. That's why it never occurred to me that he tried to make him look like Lenin. He would certainly not do anything to make him look like Trotsky. Trotsky was. He's not just a deadly enemy of Stalin's. He was a deadly enemy of the Soviet Union. I mean, he was completely extirpated from any kind of reference. I mean, there were to be no references to him at all. And as I say, even with Lenin was just very much diminished relative to Stalin. The cult of Lenin really began after Stalin's death, as Stalin was shoved from his central role. Then they began this whole worship of Lenin and the cult of Lenin and so on. But That all came much later. So that's why I don't think Eisenstein was trying to make him look like Lenin. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but that's I just don't think that that's what he would do. If, as you said, he's being financed by the Soviet government, and Eisenstein is no fool. He knows exactly that it's Stalin who is front and center in the Soviet system. Anyway, thank you for that, Cynthia. Thank you for your generous contribution, for many, many generous contributions. And and then there's Anne Marie. Always really good to see you, Anne Marie. Anne Marie is our musical expert. She's the one who always uh, enlightens us on so many fascinating aspects of music and the performance of, uh, of the great works of music, because she's worked with the best conductors in the world, the best orchestras in the world, best composers, and does this all the time. So we're always very happy that she even finds the time to join us for these live streams. And she recently made some very interesting comments about uh, the discomfort that's involved in playing in orchestras, and which is something that is a regular uh, thing for her, but it's really just fascinating for those who don't perform in orchestras. So and all the physical discomfort that's involved, and so she gives us a kind of an insight into everything that's involved. When you think of, you have to sit through lengthy operas. I mean, if you, let's say you were Wagner, you have one of Wagner's acts. That could be about 2 hours. So that's 2 hours without a break. So you're sitting there in kind of uncomfortable chair, and often it's very hot in there, and I mean you got a lot of musicians around you, and uh, you can't cross or uncross your leg. You can't have a drink of water. You can't just sit and play with your phone and everything else. You have to sit still, and you have to wait for your cue, and then you have to perform really well. I mean, that's it's if you're playing in one of the finest orchestras in the world, you are expected to perform at a very high level. And so just a really, really fascinating comment that Anne Marie posted. So I urge everybody to read her observations, and indeed her observations about all of the music that we post here. So thank you so much, Anne Marie. Thank you very much for your comments. Thank you very much for your generosity. Um, and then Summer Petrus. Thank you. He was talking about Bill Rogers was the remaining extreme moderate and a member of the Gang of Four. That's right. But what I don't remember about Bill Rogers, I remember he had this very dour face. The other three I remember very clearly, and I can see their faces now. But Bill Rogers, I just remember he was kind of a very dour face. But I don't even remember what he held some ministerial posts, but I don't think he was a very senior post. Maybe I'm wrong, but maybe he was secretary for transportation. But he was always the slightly lesser figure of the four. Roy Jenkins. He'd obviously held just about every senior position in the UK government. David Owen, he had been foreign secretary, but as Harold Wilson, said in one of his interviews, Wilson used to love these kinds of interviews. He would say about David Owen, "I thought he was brought on a little too early." That's his classic kind of disparaging comment. I think he was brought on a little too early, just to show that Owen was a little bit of a lightweight. And I think that was true. I think he was brought on when he was really still very much a junior minister, but My recollection is that James Callahan, he was the prime minister at the time, liked him, and then Anthony Crosland, who was foreign secretary, and he was a political heavyweight within the Labour Party, but he suddenly died. He got a heart attack and he died. He was relatively young, and I think Callahan really didn't have anyone to replace Crossland, and so he pushed David Owen, and I think Owen was really quite lightweight to take that position. But that's what gave Owen this sense that he's a political heavyweight. But it was only just the fortuitous that Crossland had this heart attack, and they needed somebody to step up, and Callahan gave him that job. And then, of course, Owen made it. You know, then he had that he was involved in the wars in the Balkans, and I wrote quite a lot about Owen in my book, who. I mean, he was a, a man who had kind of managed to think three different things on the same subject, and it was always a question of you never had any idea what the hell he was going to say at any time. So sometimes you thought Milosevic is really good, he's someone you can work with. Next day he'd say we need to bomb Milosevic. Then he would go back and say, yeah, I had a good meeting with Milosevic. Then he'd say, Milosevic needs to be in prison. You could never get anywhere trying to get any coherent thinking from David Owen. And that's somebody who was a former foreign secretary. So, but then that's that's a little bit inside baseball for people who remember Britain in the 1970s. Anyway, Cynthia then goes on. Says, yesterday, Professor Morandi lost his home connection and used the station, likely Press TV, to get online. Nima from Dialogue Works was also knocked offline yesterday, but he's back today broadcasting from home. Given his background as an electrical engineer, oh, is he? I didn't know that. Nima may have bypassed local outages by setting up Starlink, an impressive feat considering the technical hurdles and strict government restrictions. Yeah, definitely. I didn't know that about him. So he's an electrical engineer. Well, that's always impressive. So yeah, and then Cynthia goes on. Max Blumenthal says a key debate in Washington, especially among Republicans, is whether seizing Maduro was legal. An ICJ ruling, Congo versus Belgium, says a sitting head of state can't be abducted and tried in a national court. The proper route is an ICC indictment and transfer to The Hague. By bringing Maduro to a New York court, Trump challenges the post-war legal order. If he is convicted, it signals international law has little force. By contrast, the Assange case ran into First Amendment protection. Well, I mean, I go much further than that. A sitting head of state automatically enjoys immunity from any prosecution by any other state, obviously, because no state, because the international law is predicated on the sovereign equality of states. So that's what sovereign equality means. It means that no state can put on trial the head of any other state, not even for personal things. So this isn't even when we were talking about Trump's immunity from prosecution for his official acts, but he doesn't enjoy immunity for his personal acts, either personal or official. In no case can he be put on trial by any other state. Now, the ICC also cannot do so for a number of reasons. First of all, the ICC has no legal standing. None. It's not affiliated with the United Nations. I mean, just because they have their offices at The Hague And so they want people to confuse the ICC with the ICJ. But the ICJ is affiliated with the United Nations, but it has no criminal element to it. I mean, what the ICJ does is it can only rule first of all, either in an advisory way, it can give an advisory opinion, like, well, this is our legal opinion on a matter, which means it has no coercive powers over any state, or it can rule when there is a dispute between two states, and so they voluntarily they come before the ICJ. And the ICJ can give a ruling, but it has no coercive power over anyone. So you can just ignore the ICJ, and of course, Israel is regularly ignores the rulings of the ICJ, as did the United States. And the ICJ famously ruled against the United States in the Nicaragua case in 1986. Nicaragua brought a case against the United States, and the ICJ did indeed find that the United States was waging an illegal war against Nicaragua. But the United States just simply ignored it. What do we care? But the ICC has whatever binding force it has only on those states that actually sign and ratify the Rome Statute. If you don't, or if you withdraw from the Rome Statute, then the ICC has no legal force at all. But it's even worse than that. Even for those countries that do sign on to the ICC and do ratify the ICC, even then, sovereign immunity applies. The ICC is not like the ICTY. The ICTY declared that, heads of state don't enjoy immunity from prosecution. The ICTY had no basis whatsoever from saying that. They just said it. They just said it in their statute. They said, just because you're head of state, you don't enjoy immunity. But there was no legal basis for making that assertion. It just simply did it. It just flatly asserted it in its statute. The head of state doesn't enjoy immunity. But of course the head of state enjoys immunity. That's always been the case throughout the history of states. So the ICTY just simply made stuff up, and no one questioned it, because they thought, hey, this is really cool. We're going to put on trial, all these people that we don't like Slobodan Milosevic. But the ICC doesn't say that. The ICC doesn't say. They know that no one would accept anything like that. If you're head of state, you don't enjoy immunity. So in fact, they do have the get out clause that states can indeed invoke sovereign immunity, and therefore the ICC cannot go after heads of state. So there's of course it's completely illegal. But that's a different issue from whether Maduro is likely to prevail on this claim, because Maduro will certainly make this claim, as Noriega did in 1989, which is, I have sovereign immunity. You can't put me on trial. And Noriega failed. I mean, the courts rejected his appeal. And then, of course, Noriega also made the claim that he had been abducted and he had been brought to trial involuntarily, and he hadn't been able to challenge the extradition. He also had been indicted by a United States court. But you see, every person has due process. Every person has the right to challenge his extradition. Assange had that right. Everybody has that right. So when you're denied that right, when you're simply seized and abducted, and you're denied the possibility of challenging your extradition, then obviously your rights have been denied, and you're entitled to walk free. I mean, that's the way the system works. I mean, if there's serious procedural abuse by the police and prosecutors, then essentially the benefit of the doubt redounds to the defendant. So Noriega made that claim, but Noriega failed. So obviously Maduro is going to make this claim, and they're correct. In both cases, Maduro will be correct in the claim. But I just don't think he will be prevail. And that's I mean, you say this international law has gone. It went when with the ICTY. The ICTY was a complete travesty of international law. As I said, they just simply stated in their statute, which has no legal standing. They themselves, they just simply invented this out of whole cloth. They created their own statute, and then they said, oh well, the sovereigns have no immunity. And provided no legal theory to explain how they came to that conclusion, which is the opposite of what international law has always stated. And then, of course, they operated on the principle of secret indictments. So defendants didn't know that they were indicted by the ICTY, and operated on the principle of abductions. So Milosevic was abducted in Belgrade and hauled off to The Hague. He had not been able to challenge his extradition, and he was abducted after the Constitutional Court of Yugoslavia had ruled that he cannot be abducted, that he has to stay in Belgrade. He cannot simply be taken, because the government, the kind of Quisling government that had taken over in Belgrade by then under Zoran Djindjic, they just wanted to hand him over. But the Constitutional Court said, no, you cannot do that. He's entitled to due process. But he was nonetheless abducted and taken to The Hague. And then, of course, he died at The Hague. So, international law is, has long been in the toilet. So, I'm no defender of Trump, but I'm not going to buy into the thesis that somehow there used to be something called international law that everybody respected until Trump came along. So Trump works within the same parameters that these predecessors worked. George H.W. Bush had no legal basis to go in and kidnap Noriega. George W. Bush, his son, had no legal basis to invade Iraq. Bill Clinton had no legal basis to bomb Yugoslavia. So, Trump didn't start this. Anyway, let's go on. Here we are. Yes. So anyway, Cynthia goes on. Max Blumenthal says that's the one we just read. And then there was another one. Max also said Trump has two options: negotiate with Delcy, a deal maker who wants to avoid Venezuela's destruction, or keep escalating. Unlike Syria, the U.S. has no proxy force inside Venezuela. The Guarimbas and Guaido failed. Humanitarian intervention failed. Only the recent deadly raid gave the U.S. leverage, but continued attacks on Caracas would destabilize the country. As ex-Foreign Minister Arias argued, the current government guarantees order. Is that Arias or Arias? Because there was Arias who was a foreign minister, but I don't know. That's what you mean. As Foreign Minister Arias argued, the current government guarantees order. Remove it and chaos follows. Venezuela owns Venezuela. I think Trump's view is keep these people in power who are afraid of him because they're afraid that what happened to Maduro will happen to them. So he feels that's going to give him leverage over Delcy Rodriguez and the rest of the government. So they're likely to play along with him. Um, and while he maintains a military force in the Caribbean, so that's I think his plan. You have to say though that by eschewing regime change, it's by a John McCain or Bush or any of his predecessors would have probably tried to install Machado or Guaido or Gonzalez into power. And that would have led to complete collapse because the military would never have accepted Guaido, the military would never have accepted Machado, and then the place would just collapse. There'd be civil war, and so Trump has avoided that, which is obviously quite uh, smart on his part. And he figures at this stage is that the government in Caracas is afraid of him, is afraid of crossing him, afraid of sharing the fate of Maduro, and so they'll play ball with him. Question then is, how long will that go on? Because after a while, the fear will disappear. Trump will start focusing on other things. Right now, he's focusing on Iran. Who knows? He might now, at some point, go and focus on Ukraine, or he might get back to China. And at that moment, Venezuela might start, moving in a more independent direction once they're no longer afraid of Trump. Uh, the question is this oil production. That he talks about. I don't see that happening. I don't see there's any real need for massive oil production. Oil prices are low. Now, admittedly, there's been a little bit of a spike since the troubles in Iran, but we saw in that meeting in the White House last Friday that the representatives of the oil majors are not keen on going back into Venezuela. They invested a lot of money, they lost. Um, they don't really see the current situation as very stable, and they don't want to plant billions of dollars if they think they might lose it all again. And the low oil prices kind of don't really justify any massive expenditures. So that's the message they gave Trump, and then Trump got very snippy, sort of by ExxonMobil. He said, I didn't like that guy, whatever his name was, the ExxonMobil. I didn't like his attitude. I didn't like him. He's not gonna have any part in Venezuela. I'm gonna keep him out of Venezuela. I didn't like him. Um, so at the moment, what does he want from Delcy Rodriguez immediately? I guess is stop providing Cuba with oil. I mean that's one thing that I think she probably will deliver on. But other than that, I think she's just going to keep things humming until Trump kind of loses interest, because there's so much else going on. I just don't think Trump will retain his interest in Venezuela. So I think just for the time being, keep him happy. And then, of course, Machado's coming to town on Thursday, and I don't think that's going to lead to anything. I think Trump will just have a pleasant conversation, but he's not going to he's not going to force Machado onto Venezuela. So, anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. And then Vic Shakapopoulos says, "Dear George, the works of which communist thinkers have you studied? Do you have favorite communist thinker political texts that you still find relevant in 2026?" It's very hard to say. I mean, the when one thinks about the communists, I mean, all their theories are are themselves not very interesting. They're obviously kind of, you can see right away why this isn't going to work. So what is interesting about the communists is when they show themselves to be very skilled political players, and I think that's where they are interesting. Not because of their theories. I mean, you read Lenin and you don't really think. Um, I mean, it doesn't leave you at all impressed because most of these, Lenin as a thinker, he was very derivative. He kind of basically stole other people's ideas, all that stuff about imperialism and capitalism and so on. I mean, he got it all from the Austrian economists, so he didn't really contribute anything interesting there. And then when he wrote his State and Socialism, again, he kind of cribbed all the ideas from the anarchists. So he wasn't an interesting thinker. Um, but he was a brilliant political tactician. And that's where I think the communists are quite interesting, that somehow they managed to outmaneuver, with all their kind of weird ideas and, obviously unrealistic. They were somehow, they combined their, utopian banalities with an extraordinary political shrewdness and a kind of tactical brilliance. And I think that's where I find the communists quite interesting. I mean, obviously, we talked earlier in response to Cynthia's question about Lenin in 1917, how Lenin pulled that off. And, this party, the Bolsheviks, they were a minority. There's a lot of parties that were a hell of a lot more popular than the Bolsheviks, but somehow he managed to seize power. He managed to win a civil war. I mean, overwhelming forces against him. He managed to win that civil war. He managed to see off the Allied intervention. So that's quite a tall order, and that's where I think the communists are interesting. And the same goes for Stalin. Again, how he pulled that off, how he was against all the odds. He succeeded in retaining power. So it seems easy until somebody else tries to do it, and they're not able to do it. So the people who came after, the communist rulers who came after Lenin and Stalin, had no idea how to retain power. They had no idea how to fight off opposition. They had no idea, how to organize coups. If you just remember 1991 in the Soviet Union, when they tried to organize a coup against Gorbachev, it fell apart in a few hours. I mean, they lost the ability that Lenin and Stalin and Trotsky had. How do you organize a coup? How do you seize power? And then, even more important, is how do you hold on to power? And that's why I think the communists are quite interesting to study them. The Hungarian communists, like my great uncle, they're also quite interesting. I mean, they didn't succeed, but they were interesting in how they adopted the kind of the nationalist message far more so than the anti-communists. So they managed to try to preserve historic Hungary. They're communists, supposedly against nationalists. The communists did more to try to protect and defend historic Hungary from attack, from disintegration, from collapse, a lot more than the bourgeois politicians, the bourgeois anti-communist politicians who did nothing to protect Hungary. So to answer that question, as thinkers, I don't find any of them particularly interesting. As political tacticians, I do find it really interesting studying them. Anyway, Dale Owens, good to see you, Dale. Dale says, George, I see that Jerry Gable, the Searchlight guide, has passed away. Fined 25 quid for breaking into David's house David Irving's house disguised as a post office official in '63. Okay, I didn't know that. That's yeah, it's interesting. Um, you know, uh, it's kind of an interesting issue that, and here's something that I'm not in. You know, one thing I was kind of interested in is when in the early days of Julian Assange, he published, was it, I think, the data of the addresses and everyone of the members of the British National Party. And at that time, of course, the uh, WikiLeaks was still very much approved of by officials, and I always wondered something about the whether the origins of WikiLeaks was, as you know, he was used as a way of funneling information. It was like just you know, basically these were leaks coming from MI5 or MI6, and they were using it to WikiLeaks as to funnel information and to pretend, well, we had nothing to do with it. And we know this, that there are lots of these outfits that, you know, supposedly, oh, they do journalism, but basically they're conduits for officially leaked information in order to discredit someone. So that was the early days of WikiLeaks when they published, you know, quite outrageous, because it's hard to see the public interest in publishing the addresses of members of the British National Party. But then I think there was some sort of a falling out between WikiLeaks and officialdom, and then led to, of course, you know, the persecution of Julian Assange. But anyway, I mean, that's a little bit off the topic that you're uh, uh, saying. But the persecution of David Irving that went on throughout his life was kind of extraordinary. And when he was arrested and imprisoned in Austria, essentially for exercising his free speech rights, the British government didn't really do very much to protect him. They didn't say, "Hey, I think it's you know, outrageous." I mean, he's not doing anything. He's just simply, you may not like his views, but you're imprisoning him for his opinions. But you know, British government didn't really do anything at all to protect Irving. Anyway, thank you so much, Dale. And um, and then Aristotle One says, "Nice to see your discussion with Paul Craig Roberts. Great, a very incisive man. I absolutely agree with you. On Putin, it is sad that he has been so cautious in wartime. I feel, however, that he is one of the few great leaders of my lifetime. Without him, Russia would be a bigger Ukraine." Okay, I think that's a fair point. Um, that and that's why, if you look back on the trajectory of Putin's career, had he decided in 2018 that he wasn't going to run for another term, if he retired in 2018, I think he would be hailed as one of the great leaders of Russia. He'd be hailed as one of the great statesmen of Russia. You know, Russia recovered from the awfulness of the 1990s. You know, got his self-respect back. It's become, you know, had become, you know, once again a military power. You know, you know, a great power. Not obviously not the same level of the Soviet Union was, but he would be regarded as one of the successful leaders. There aren't really that many that Russians, you know, extol as their great leaders. And so Putin, I think, would have been that. But now you're going to have that war in Ukraine is going to be part of his legacy, and it's going to play an enormous role in historians' assessments of Putin. In fact, it'll probably be, you know, the most important uh, uh, acts of his political career. So, um, you know, that happens. It's always, you know, what you did before counts for you know, little. relative to what happened later on. Now, if it works out well, then okay, you'll say, okay, well, at least it all worked out. If it doesn't work out, then this is going to cast a grave shadow over, and it will overshadow everything else that he accomplished in his career. So I absolutely agree. I mean, he did a lot of good things um, for Russia, but wars are always very tricky, and he's not the first leader who thought that I can get into a war that I can win pretty easily and walk away with um, a very successful outcome. So it didn't work out that way. Anyway, Aristotle goes on. Do you think Russia should just hit all the control centers in Ukraine with their Oreshniks, which are apparently unstoppable? It seems nothing would make Zelensky finish his grift apart from brute force to break the system. Sadly, to get rid of the parasites, it is necessary to burn the house down. I tend to think that that's right. I think at this stage, Russia really needs to do whatever it can in order to bring this thing to an end as quickly as possible. And if that means, yeah, knock out the entire energy grid. I mean, that's it. Boom. There's nothing it does. You can't conduct any military operations at all because the energy grid is completely out. I think that would end the war. Or just it's basically now an all-out attack on Ukraine's military capabilities. The the longer this war goes on, the more dangerous it is, the more peril it is, because with Trump there, and Trump, always kind of thinking of new things, new initiatives, and very dangerous tactics, that could all end very badly for Russia. So I think that you always want to get your war out of the way as quickly as possible. Now, ideally, you win your war in the first 3 days. If you can't do that, then bring brute force to bear. And take whatever losses that happen, and no one likes it, but at least it's over. But the longer it drags on, you're going to pay with more and more lives, and the outcome becomes ever more uncertain because there are just so many different um, uncertainties in a war. Anything at all can happen, and so therefore you just shut it down. That's that's the best thing. Yeah, very very unpleasant, but if you can end it, then you're ahead. If you don't end it, then as we've seen in this war so far, there's been a lot of unpleasant surprises. A direct result of not having finished things off when he should have done. Anyway, Anne Marie says, "What do you think is actually going on in Argentina with these wildfires in Patagonia? Is there any truth to some claims that there are Israelis behind it in order to get their hands on the territory?" I don't know, to be honest. I mean, it's a very interesting story, and I've read that there's uh, a search for getting cheap property in Patagonia, and that's what it's all about. That there's these wildfires in order to get Israelis or rich Jews to buy this cheap property in Patagonia. It wouldn't surprise me. I can't say that is the case. It wouldn't surprise me. We're dealing with really very unscrupulous people here, and I think that's, and given also Millet and his very creepy, disgusting relationship with Israel. Really really disgusting. I absolutely would think that he's in on this whole project. So I can't say I've got any kind of definitive proof that this is happening, but I find the theory that this is all being orchestrated in order to in order to get Israelis or rich Jews to buy up property at dirt cheap prices. I find it very plausible. So, yeah. If you ask me, do I think it's happening? Yeah, I absolutely do. Um, anyway, thank you so much. So then here's Schlum Bucket Return says the Assange prosecution was also absurd. I agree. Journalists have no allegiance to any state, as though they could be prosecuted for being disloyal. It was an assault on truth. All of that is correct. He had no connection whatever with the United States. None. I mean, he was not a U.S. citizen. He never worked in the United States. I think he visited it briefly once or maybe twice. So he had no connection with it. And he was a journalist. I mean, he was, he never actually did what you can at least prosecute people for, which is had a hand in stealing official secrets. He had no hand in stealing official secrets. But yeah, that was the whole thing was done in order to intimidate journalists. So yeah, of course, it was absurd. There was no legal basis for it. But this is what happens. When you're strong and you've got allies who are ready to play your little game, as the United States had with the UK, and probably really with any country within Europe, well, then you can do this. And you can go on making all these arguments that we've been making, and that isn't going to make any difference. Um, so that's how they pulled that off. However ludicrous, but that's how they pulled it off. And Anne Marie says Millet looks like the incorporation of the devil. I can't. Yeah, I agree with that. I agree. I agree. And that whole sight of him at the Wailing Wall and with the yarmulke. Ooh, just the whole thing is just really, really creepy. In fact, his whole relationship with Israel and everything. I mean, like, you're Argentinian. You've got your problems in Argentina. Argentina has many problems, and you're preoccupied with Israel. Why exactly? That really is very, very creepy. Anyway, my time is up. Thank you so much, everybody who joined me. Thank you for so many interesting comments and questions and observation. Really appreciate that. Appreciate, of course, those who very generously put something into the tip jar, knowing that the dogs are going to be up very shortly, and they are going to be commenting, often in very scabrous language about the condition of the tip jar. So I'm going to hear this, and it's not going to be a pretty sound. But thank you, everyone who's at least makes my life a little bit easier. So we'll be back on Thursday, same time, 3 p.m. Eastern time. Look forward to seeing you then. Until then, all the best. Good night. Bye.